So hi everyone. On today's Future Frogmen conversation series, we have an accomplished artist and biological illustrator, Flick Ford, and he's best known for his lifelike paintings of just a wide diversity of animal subjects, as you'll see here today. So welcome, Flick. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
So many can identify with this love of nature that's quite apparent in your work, but what sparked that interest in drawing animals?
My family was very much involved in camping and fishing and outdoor activities. So from a very early age, I got immersed in it.
So a lot of your paintings, you refer to them more as portraits, which is interesting. A lot of people think of portraits as more of a person in their face, but you do it for animals, and it's the whole animal. So why do you refer to them as a portrait, and how do you choose those subjects?
My first book was about 77 great fish of North America. And the idea was that I was to catch and paint all of the fish, 77 fish for the book, and so that they were to be portraits. They weren't going to be the type of representations you see in guidebooks that are generic. I was actually going to paint fish that I caught. Things like this aren't exactly a portrait. I have seen sharks in the wild, but one of the things I've noticed in the modern age is that with the rise of computers and videos, is that it's very easy to see things that were very hard to get resources on, and you can look at videos, and you can look at really great close-up photographs. And so the resources on the internet are fantastic. So that's one thing that has really helped inform my work. The second book I did, which was called Big, the 50 greatest world record catches, was a book done with the IGFA, and those were fish portraits. Those were the actual world records at the time. And at that time, the IGFA was getting more into conservation. So it was really great to be able to paint all those fish. It was kind of fun being a kid who kind of grew up in that National Geographic mode. It was great doing reconstructions. It reminded me of dinosaur kind of reconstructions. And I was actually asked to do some reconstructions for the Academy of Natural Sciences of Tiktaalik, which is considered the earliest ancestor to vertebrates, us included, because it had a neck. It could look both ways before crossing the road. So here's my representation of Tiktaalik I did for the Academy of Natural Sciences, I think in 2010.
So one of the most striking things about your work, and we've seen a little bit of this already from the works that you've shared, is just that incredible detail that you're known for. These are biologically accurate paintings. But sometimes it's very hard to achieve that detail, especially when you're working with fishes and things that are usually underwater. So how have you decided to try to get that detail across? What's your rendering process to make that come to life?
Right. Here's a piece I did of the world record lobster. It was a commission for a guy who was very much into lobsters. To paint fish and a lot of aquatic creatures, I noticed that trying to paint individual scales or bumps or ridges or plates or things separately, it was very hard to try to blend them into a whole. With fish in particular, they have a way of blending from a dark surface on the top to a lighter surface on the bottom. So, and sometimes they change color from side to side, but not in this example. So what I wanted to do was to try to come up with a technique that would allow me to show scales, but to keep the gradation. So in order to do that, I had found something called liquid frisket medium. It's a type of paintable rubber cement. And if I apply it, starting from a white sheet, the drawing on the white sheet of watercolor paper, if I apply it and start to do my washes, I can hold back anything that's supposed to be white. I don't think I have anything white on this fish, but starting with the lightest wash of, say, a very light green color to a pale gold color, you can see that I have masked off rims of scales and other parts of scales. Now you can see that there's a progression of colors in here. There's a very light color. That would have been the first wash that I'd masked off with these edges. Then you can see it gets a little darker. That would have been perhaps, you know, the middle of the scale. And that would have been masked off. And then another wash was applied. So in other words, every single time I apply paint to this fish, I'm wetting the whole fish silhouette and I'm applying paint. What's creating the details is the liquid frisket medium that is sitting on the watercolor paper. So it gets up to about 5 or 6 layers. As you can see on this fin, which has light blue markings on it, at one point, that was the color there. So if you're imagining the very first wash, it would have been light blue to a very light yellow to a very light green to a very light yellow. And then I would have masked off what I wanted to save. Then the next layer, and I work from light to dark that way. And so it allowed me to make complex detail, but also keep that clean gradation that these animals have. I wound up finding out that the technique worked just as well for invertebrates. It worked just as well for creatures with fur. This is a Florida panther. So as you can see, the same technique, you know, holding back the white, then holding back some of the gray, holding back some of the tawny color. So that technique worked for that. It also, I found out it worked well for doing birds and feathers. As you can see, I managed to mask off, you know, the tines of a feather in the spine, and it allows me to build up a feather in the same way. So that is my own personal technique. I'd say it owes more to printing, perhaps like silk screening or actually a printing press, than it does to traditional watercolor painting, which is usually done with a wet sheet, and you add washes and details until it's dry, and then you put in dry brush details. When all of the frisket layers are complete, and it's up to 5 or 6 layers, I rub it off, and it comes right off with a rubber cement pickup. And I start applying washes of clean water just to soften the edges so it doesn't look like a silk screen or a hard-edged thing. And then I do go in with very fine sable hair brushes and do detail. And so at the end of the day, when it's all complete, it really has unparalleled detail. So I think at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about taxonomic plates. One of the things that I wanted to do with my art was to update the genre of taxonomic plates. And that came about when I started to paint fish with complete backgrounds. This doesn't have a background, but this was more or less the kind of stuff I did for many years. And I just started to paint fish to record my best catches. And they were kicking around my studio for about a year. I had maybe a dozen of them. And my father became concerned that they were going to get ruined. So he took them from me and he had them shrink wrapped and matted and to preserve them. But what he did was he took them to the J. Russell Genetian Gallery in Fairfield, Connecticut. And Russell Genetian took me in off the street. And I, all of a sudden, was being shown. And I think the first show I was shown at was a James Prozic book signing. And I sold a couple of pieces. And so I prematurely quit all my jobs and tried to make a go of it as a fish artist. and it took a while, but it got going. So I was doing an equal number of the taxonomic plate style paintings and things like fish in situ, underwater shots. But this style was outselling the in situ style with fish about 10-1. So that's when I decided to really bear down on it and concentrate just on that. And after a few years, that led to me getting a book deal by the Greenwich Workshop, which shared the same building in Fairfield, Connecticut with the J. Russell Genesian Gallery. They had the downstairs print gallery, and J. Russell Genesian had an upstairs fine art, marine art, and sporting art gallery where my work was shown. So the owner of the Greenwich Workshop Gallery, Scott Usher, saw my work, and I initially went to him to talk about a study I was doing about the angling market and art. And I went to talk to him about it, and we had a nice conversation. And at the end of the meeting, he asked me if I would like to do a book on fish in the style I was doing, and that's how it all started. It was basically the taxonomic plate style, 77 great fish in North America, and the follow-up book, Big. So
Okay.
both of those books use that taxonomic style. My third book also, which I got to actually write, Wild, 75 Freshwater Tropical Fish of the World, which is a conservation-based book on the 75 iconic tropical fish species that the hobby has depended on. I wanted to do a book that talked about how those tropical fish are faring in their own environment. And I self-published that book. It's amazing that most of these fish are either being bred in fish farms in Asia or America and all over, but actually the actual stocks that I used to collect in the 60s as a kid were all wild stocks in those days. And it was big news when a species was captive bred. Now almost everything in the hobby is captive bred, which is great, but unfortunately we're ignoring what's going on in the rainforests all over the world, which is a pretty critical habitat for the health of the oceans and everything. So yeah, well, there's a relationship between they call it the rainforest to reef relationship. About 70 to 80% of the world's water falls in tropical rainforests, and it washes out to reefs. And those nutrients and that relationship, it's in balance, helps keep reefs very healthy. When these rainforests are developed and turned into farms and other stuff, and the agricultural runoff and the chemicals and the silt, it directly goes into the reefs. And the reefs are already under a lot of pressure from the warming of the oceans and the acidification of the oceans. All of these things contribute to really hurting the world's fisheries and water. And I'm sure most of your audience knows all this stuff. That's one thing I felt like I should do as an aquarist all my life. I mean, I feel like I owe these fish something. So.
And that sort of hits on the potential message behind these works that you're doing. A lot of people are really attracted just to the vibrant colors and to the detail in these. But what message are you hoping to convey through some of these works?
Well, when we look at all the amazing creatures that aquatic life, and we realize where we are right now, this is a really critical time. My message is that I hope in portraying these creatures in as much detail and the way I see them as beautiful creatures, I hope that translates. I hope it creates an empathy.
Thank you for watching the Future Frogmen Conversation Series. Please check out our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.